She was the kind of woman people looked through, not at. Iris Dunn had made a science of it. In 7 years of working the books for Callahan and Merritt Logistics, a company that moved freight, allegedly, she had perfected the art of occupying space without taking it up. She wore muted colors. She kept her voice low. She took her lunch at 11:15, before anyone else, and was back at her desk by 11:42. She knew the exact angle to tilt her monitor so no one could glance at her screen from the hallway. She knew which floorboards creaked between the elevator and her office door. She knew everything about that building, and she was quite certain that almost no one in it knew anything about her. That was the arrangement she preferred. The freight company occupied the 4th and 5th floors of a converted warehouse on the edge of New Orleans' Lower Garden district. The exterior was all exposed brick and wrought iron balconies, the kind of bones that could have made it beautiful if anyone had bothered to try. But the loading docks on the ground floor stayed busy at odd hours, and the men in Italian wool who took the private elevator to the 5th floor never smiled. And Iris had long since stopped pretending she didn't understand what Callahan and Merritt actually was. She just didn't look. She kept her head down. She did the books. It wasn't the job she'd imagined at 23, when she graduated summa cum laude with a degree in accounting and a minor in mathematics. But it was a job that paid 3 times market rate, asked no questions, and left her alone in her climate-controlled office with her spreadsheets, and her weak coffee, and the small orange tabby cat she'd smuggled in after the first winter. Biscuit, 11 pounds of pure disdain, curled on top of the filing cabinet like he owned the place. They were fine, quiet, and fine. It was on a Tuesday in October when everything stopped being fine. Iris had stayed late. She always stayed late on the last Tuesday of the month when she ran the reconciliations. The 5th floor had emptied out around 7, the wool-suited men gone to wherever such men went at night, and she'd made a 3rd cup of coffee and settled in, spreadsheets blooming across her dual monitors. That was when she found it. It wasn't obvious. Whoever had done it was good, better than good. The numbers were threaded through 6 separate line items across 4 different accounts, disguised as equipment maintenance and routine freight fees. But Iris had been staring at these columns for 7 years. She knew their shapes the way a musician knows a melody. She knew when something was off by a fraction of a note, and someone inside the company was skimming. Not a little. Not rounding errors or petty theft from the supply closet. Whoever this was had moved, over the past 18 months, close to $4 million through undercount that technically existed and practically vanished. Iris sat very still in her chair for approximately 90 seconds. Then she did what she should not have done. She printed it. She told herself it was habit. She told herself she'd shred it in the Asians. She told herself she'd shred it in the morning. She tucked the papers into her bag, saved nothing to any drive, and began the careful process of closing down her workstation. Biscuit lifted his head from the filing cabinet and blinked at her with the mild contempt that was his default expression. "Don't look at me like that," she said quietly. "I'll shred it in the morning." She didn't make it to morning. She was in the elevator, bag over one shoulder and Biscuit's carrier in her other hand, when the lobby doors opened below. She heard the footsteps before she saw the men, 2 of them, moving wrong too fast, not like the delivery drivers who sometimes came late with freight paperwork. She pressed herself against the elevator wall without quite meaning to, and watched through the small safety window in the stairwell door as they passed beneath her. She recognized one of them. Tommy Orin. He ran the loading dock, answered directly to the 5th floor, and had once told her the best thing she could do for herself was stay in her lane and not ask questions she didn't want answered. She'd taken that advice. Until tonight. Iris took the stairs. She made it 3 blocks before the black car rolled up beside her, moving slowly, keeping pace. The window came down. "Mrs. Dunn." The man in the passenger seat had a face she didn't recognize and a voice like gravel. Mr. Corsetti would like a word. She thought about running. She was wearing flat shoes, a practical woman's choice, and she'd taken a self-defense class twice, though she'd been the worst student both times, and then at the second man now standing behind her, and then at Biscuit, shifting in his carrier. "Can I bring my cat?" she asked. The man in the passenger seat blinked. "What? My cat? Can he come? There was a get in the car." She took that as a yes, the name she'd heard in whispers, in half-finished sentences that people cut off when they realized she was nearby, was Corsetti. She'd never seen a face attached to it. The fifth-floor people never said his first name, only the last. And they said it the way people say things that are both inevitable and final. Like weather, like gravity. He owned the freight company. He owned, from what she'd gathered in 7 years of quiet observation, a great deal more than the freight company. She didn't know the full scope of it and had actively avoided finding out. That had been, until this particular Tuesday, the cornerstone of her survival strategy. The car took her to a building she didn't recognize, a converted hotel in the warehouse district. The kind of place that had no sign outside and too many cameras. She was walked through a lobby that was all dark marble and low light, into an elevator that moved very fast, and then into a room that was more comfortable than she expected. Leather chairs. A wet bar no one was using. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. She sat in the leather chair because her legs requested it, and she held Biscuit's carrier in her lap, and she waited. He walked in 8 minutes later. Iris Dunn had a good eye for people. 7 years of watching suited men from the corner of her vision had refined it. She could read a room by the way energy shifted when someone entered it. When Matteo Corsetti walked in, the room didn't shift, it contracted. He was taller than she'd pictured. 40, maybe 42, with the kind of dark eyes that processed information the way cameras did, continuously, without expression. He had a jaw that looked like it had been carved with some impatience, a scar through the left eyebrow that was old and clean, and the particular stillness of a man who had never once in his adult life fidgeted. His suit was charcoal. His collar was open by one button. He looked like he'd come from something and hadn't bothered adjusting. He sat down across from her, not behind a desk, which surprised her, and studied her the way she had studied those spreadsheets. "You found something tonight," he said. Not a question. Iris weighed her options. There were not many. "Yes," she said. "Tell me." So she told him, methodically, the way she did everything, starting with the account structure, walking him through the line items, explaining exactly how the money had moved, and through what vehicle, and over how long a period. She did not have the printout in her hands. She'd left her bag by the door. But she had the numbers in her head. She always had the numbers in her head. Matteo Corsetti listened without interrupting. He had a quality that she recognized, because she'd trained herself to have it too. The ability to go very quiet and simply receive information. His hands rested on his knees. He watched her face. When she finished, he was still for a moment. "How long have you worked for the company?" he asked. 7 years. "You've never mentioned anything like this before. I've never found anything like this before." She met his eyes, which took an effort. "Whoever did it is good. They've been building this for 18 months. It's patient work." She paused. "I only caught it because I know the accounts very well. And I've been looking at the same numbers for a long time. Someone who came in fresh probably wouldn't have seen it." He was quiet again. "Then you printed it. It wasn't a question either." Iris's jaw tightened slightly. "Yes. Why? Habit. I was going to shred it in the morning." She paused. "I believe that's still true, though the morning feels less certain than it did." Something moved in his face. It was very small and very brief, and she almost missed it. A fraction of an expression, here and gone, that might have been the distant cousin of amusement. "You're not afraid," he said. Iris thought about this honestly. I'm terrified, she said. I'm just not performing it. The silence stretched. Biscuit made a small sound of displeasure from his carrier. Matteo Corsetti looked at the carrier, then back at her, and the fractional expression came back for a slightly longer visit this time. You brought your cat, he said. They said I could. I'm quite certain they did not say that. They didn't say I couldn't. He stood, and she braced herself for something, but he only moved to the window and looked out at the river below. The city light caught the planes of his face differently from this angle, not softer exactly, but more dimensional, like a photograph developing. Someone inside the operation has been stealing from me, he said to the glass. That is not a thing people do and survive. He turned. I'm going to need you to walk me through every account you manage. All of them. Tonight. Iris looked at her watch. It was nearly 10. I'll need coffee, she said. Real coffee, not whatever was in that lobby. He looked at her for another moment. Then he picked up his phone and said 3 words to whoever answered. Bring her coffee. They worked until 2 in the morning. She sat at a temporary workstation they set up for her. Proper dual monitors, access to the server she specified. And she walked him through every account, every line item, every deviation from the pattern she'd been watching for 7 years. He stood mostly, or sat on the edge of a nearby table, and asked precise questions that told her he understood numbers better than most people in freight logistics needed to. 3 other men came and went, silent, watchful, deferential to him in the particular way of men who are afraid decided that's fine. They brought files when he asked. They disappeared when he didn't need them. Around midnight, one of them put a plate of food near her workstation without comment. A proper meal, not takeout, with actual silverware. She ate without stopping her work because she was hungry, and she'd stopped being embarrassed about eating in front of people sometime around age 30, when she'd decided that embarrassment was a tax she no longer intended to pay on ordinary human functions. By 2 in the morning, they had a complete picture. 3 people inside the company. Tommy Orin, which had not surprised her, and 2 others she recognized only as faces on the 5th floor. The money had been moved through shell accounts in Belize, routed back through a construction company in Memphis, broken into amounts just small enough to clear automated flagging systems. Patient work, Matteo said quietly, almost to himself. They had time. No one was looking. You were looking. I wasn't looking for this specifically. I was just. She stopped and then finished honestly. I just pay attention. I always pay attention. He was standing closer than she'd realized. She'd been focused on the screen, and at some point in the last hour the room had contracted slightly, and now he was perhaps 4 feet away, looking at the monitor, but also, she could feel it in the quality of the air, looking at her. How much of what moves through those docks do you think you understand? He asked. Everything that touches a spreadsheet. She kept her eyes on the screen. What doesn't touch a spreadsheet, I've made a deliberate effort not to understand. Why? Because I'm not stupid. He made a sound. It might have been a laugh. It was brief and quiet, and she wasn't certain she hadn't imagined it. No, he agreed. You are definitely not stupid. She went home at 2:30 in the car they sent her in, Biscuit's carrier on the seat beside her, the city sliding past in amber and shadow. She should have been scared. She should have been running through every possible exit, calling in sick, disappearing, quietly sending her resume to firms in other states. Instead, she fell asleep in the car with her cheek against the window and dreamed about spreadsheets, which was not unusual. Nothing happened for 3 weeks. She went to work. She did the books. Likort, she did books. Biscuit occupied his filing cabinet. The 5th floor men continued their comings and goings, and Tommy Orin continued running the loading dock, and if he noticed her any differently than he had before, she couldn't tell. She didn't look for it. She went home at 5:30 and fed Biscuit and cooked dinner for herself and watched the kind of television that didn't require her to think, and she did not think about dark eyes and precise questions, and the way the room contracted. On a Thursday, not a Tuesday this time, she found the envelope on her desk. It was plain, white, unsealed. Inside was a single index card with a 12-digit number and a routing number. No note, no name. Iris sat with it for a long moment. Then she opened her bottom drawer and found the small digital notepad she kept there, and she typed in both numbers, and she thought about what they meant. And then she put the notepad back and the envelope in the shredder and got on with her reconciliations. She didn't know what to do with the fact that someone had just quietly, without fanfare or threat or explanation, deposited an amount of money into a private account that was approximately what a senior Fagris accountant in a major US city would earn in 2 years. She did know that the account wasn't in her name. Whoever had set it up knew something about financial privacy structures that went well beyond standard payroll practice. She did not ask questions. She did not say anything. She kept her head down and went on being invisible. 3 days later, a Monday, she was at her desk at 8:47 when she heard the voices in the hall, too loud, too fast, the particular cadence of men communicating urgency to each other through the pretense of not communicating urgency. She heard the warrant. She heard word problem. She heard a door close. Iris turned back to her screen. She pulled up a secondary window she didn't normally have open, a monitoring function she'd quietly added to her access permissions 8 months ago and never used, a live view of the shipping logs. Theoretically, she needed it for billing reconciliations. Practically, she'd added it because she paid attention to things. The logs showed a shipment that had been rerouted 20 minutes ago from a dock they didn't officially use. She looked at this for approximately 30 seconds. Then she picked up her phone and sent a single text to a number she shouldn't have had. She'd noted it from a phone someone had briefly left on a conference room table 7 weeks ago because she paid attention to things and old habits were old habits. Dock 7. Rerouted freight. 20 minutes ago. Not on the main log. She put the phone down and went back to work. At 11:15 she went to lunch, slightly earlier than her usual 11:15, and did not look at her phone. At 11:42 she was back at her desk. Biscuit was on the filing cabinet. Everything was the same. 3 things happened in the following 90 minutes. The first was that Tommy Orin left the building with 2 other men at a pace that people who weren't watching closely would have read as ordinary. Iris was watching closely. The second was that 4 cars arrived at the loading dock below, and the men who got out of them moved with the particular economy of people who had a specific destination in mind and were prepared for whatever they found there. The third was that her office door opened. Matteo Corsetti stood in the doorway. He was wearing a jacket that had seen recent weather. She could tell by the way it sat on his shoulders, and there was something different in his face, in the set of it, that she couldn't immediately name. Not anger, something older than anger, something that had been ground down until it was smooth and dense, and took up less space but was significantly heavier. He looked at her the way she'd felt looked at in that hotel room 3 weeks ago, directly, without performance, like she was a set of numbers he was trying to balance. "You sent that text," he said. "Yes. How did you have that number?" Not a question. A recalibration. "I notice things," Iris said simply. He came into the office and closed the door. Biscuit lifted his head, regarded the man in the charcoal jacket, and, to Iris's complete surprise, did not hiss. Biscuit hissed at everyone. He'd hissed at her building's mail carrier for 3 consecutive years. Matteo looked at the cat. The cat looked at Matteo. Something passed between them that Iris couldn't decipher. "Tommy's been working with the people he was stealing for," Matteo said. "Not just moving money, moving other things. I know." He turned. "You know, I've been looking at the shipping logs for 3 weeks." She kept her voice level. "I know how to read misdirection in a freight manifest. It's structurally similar to misdirection in a balance sheet." She paused. "I didn't know what to do with it. You could have come to me. I don't know you. The words landed quietly. He was still. Then, you texted me. That was different. That was actionable, immediate and time-sensitive. She looked at her hands, then back at him. I'm a very cautious person, Mr. Corsetti. I don't escalate things I don't have to escalate. It's how I've lasted 7 years in a place that eats people. He was quiet for a moment. Then he moved to the chair across from her desk, the one she kept there for the rare occasions a human being came to discuss something with her. And he sat down, not like someone taking a position, like someone who had decided, for the first time in a while, to stop standing. Are you safe? He asked. Iris blinked. It was not the question she'd expected. I don't. I think so. I haven't spoken to Tommy directly in 3 weeks. I don't think he's identified me as the one who... I'm not asking about Tommy. His voice was flat and certain and something else she still couldn't name. I'm asking in general. Are you safe here, in this building, doing this work? The question sat in the air between them. Iris looked at him, really looked, the way she rarely let herself look at things that cost her something. At the exhaustion that lived behind his eyes, too deep and too old to be about today, at the set of his jaw, which was tension held so long it had calcified into posture, at the scar through his eyebrow and the hands resting on his knees and the way he was sitting in her plain office chair like he was some place he'd chosen to be rather than ended up. I've been safe, she said carefully. I've worked very hard to be safe. I've been... She stopped. I've been invisible. That's how I've been safe. You're not invisible to me, he said. The silence after that was different from the other silences, heavier and lighter at once. The kind of silence that has a shape. I noticed you, he continued, and his voice was quieter now, but no less flat. If anything, more precise, the way men like this got quieter when they meant something most completely. 6 months after you started, you rearranged the entire sub-legit system, and it reduced our reconciliation time by 30%. You didn't ask for credit. You didn't tell anyone. The numbers just got better. He paused. I asked who did it. No one knew. Iris felt something shift in her chest, small and involuntary. I noticed every time after that, he said. You think you're invisible. You're not. You chose a building full of people who don't look. He met her eyes. I look. Biscuit chose this moment to stand up, stretch with great ceremony on the filing cabinet, and step deliberately onto Iris's desk. He walked across her keyboard, typing several hundred random characters into an open spreadsheet, and then installed himself directly between Iris and Matteo, looking at each of them in turn with the air of a man who has brokered difficult negotiations before. Matteo Corsetti looked at the cat. Then he looked at Iris. He does this? He said. He's inserting himself into the conversation. Iris reached over and deleted the gibberish from her spreadsheet without taking her eyes off Matteo's face. He does it when he thinks I need backup. The laugh that came out of Matteo Corsetti was quiet and short, and clearly involuntary, like something that had escaped while the guard was looking the other way. His face changed when he laughed, just briefly. The density lifted, the calcified tension cracked, and underneath it she could see the shapes of someone who had once, a long time ago, laughed easily and often. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds. Then it was gone and he was looking at her again with those camera eyes. I need to move you, he said. Move me. Your name has come up, in connection with Tommy's people. I don't know the extent of it. We're still working through that, but I'm not prepared to. He stopped. When he started again, his voice was more controlled. I'm not willing to leave that as an open variable. Iris processed this. So what does moving me mean? A different location, different systems, under different names, on paper. He paused. A different life for a while. Until it's resolved. She looked at Biscuit. Biscuit looked back at her with the serene confidence of an animal who has never once doubted that his needs will be accommodated. He comes, Iris said. Matteo's expression didn't change. Obviously, he said. The house they moved her to was in the Garden District proper, on a street of old oaks and iron fences, the kind of neighborhood that had survived 100 years of the city's chaos with its porches intact. The house was cream-colored with deep green shutters, larger than anything Iris had ever lived in, with high ceilings and wooden floors, and a second-floor study that had floor-to-ceiling bookshelves built into 2 walls. She stood in the study on the first evening and felt something she didn't immediately recognize. Then she identified it. Relief, the bone-deep, involuntary kind, the kind that meant she'd been holding her breath without knowing it. She set up her workstation by the window that overlooked the back garden. Biscuit found a patch of sun on the windowsill and claimed it. She made coffee in the kitchen, which was better equipped than her apartment had been, and she thought about what it meant to be in a strange house in a strange part of town with a new set of system credentials and a dead phone number and a private account with 2 years of a senior forensic accountant's salary in it. She thought about it for a while. Then she opened her laptop and started working. Matteo came on the 3rd day. Not announced, but not exactly a surprise either. She heard the car outside at 7 in the evening. She'd learned the particular sound of the cars he traveled in, which she was aware was a specific and meaningful kind of attention, and she was already putting the kettle on when he came through the front door. He stood in the kitchen doorway. He was in a jacket again, a different one, and he looked. She searched for the word, tired in the way that wasn't today's tired. The kind of tired that was structural. "Sit down," she said. "I'm making tea. I also have coffee if you'd prefer." He looked at her for a moment. Then he sat down at the kitchen table. He had coffee. She had tea. Biscuit installed himself on the table between them, which was technically not allowed, but Iris had limited political capital and she spent it selectively. "Tommy's in custody," Matteo said. "His, not mine." He meant law enforcement, which was a whole separate structure she had chosen not to understand. "The others are being dealt with." "Dealt with?" Iris, he met her eyes. "You don't want specifics." "No," she agreed. "I don't. It's winding down. Another week or 2. He looked out the kitchen window at the back garden, which in the October dark was just shapes of old hedges and the suggestion of an iron bench. "After that, you can go back. Or, she stopped. She said. He looked back at her. The camera eyes, the old exhaustion, the scar through his eyebrow. Biscuit, between them, blinked slowly and began to purr. "You're the only person who has ever sent me an unsolicited text about freight manifests," Matteo said. Iris considered this. "That's a very specific category of person to be alone in." "It's the category I was looking for." She looked at her tea, then at him, in the kitchen light, in the old house, with the oak trees outside making their slow October sounds. He looked less like gravity and more like something that had been waiting a long time to stop moving. "I don't know how to be visible," she said. "Not an apology. Just a fact. I know." He reached across the table, past Biscuit, who deigned to permit this, and put his hand over hers. His hand was warm and still and certain. "You've been practicing the wrong thing. You've been practicing disappearing." He paused. "You can stop." Iris looked at his hand on hers. At her own hand, which was steady, which surprised her and didn't. She was a woman who had made a science of being invisible, and the science had served her and cost her in equal measure, and she thought perhaps it was time to run a different experiment. "I have conditions," she said. Something in him shifted. Not the almost law this time. Something quieter and deeper and more permanent. "Name them." "Biscuit has full house privileges." "Done. I keep my own accounts, my own work. I don't want to be kept. You'll be paid. Properly, for actual work." He paused. "Which you're already doing." "And I don't want to know things I don't ask to know." She looked up. "If I ask, you tell me. If I don't ask, you don't volunteer it." He was quiet for a moment. "That's fair. And you don't do that thing," she said. He tilted his head slightly. "What thing?" "That thing people do when they think you should look different or dress different or be." She stopped. That thing! His jaw tightened, but not at her. She could read that much. It was tightening around something that had been said to her, that he was imagining, that clearly did not sit well with him. No one, he said, and his voice was its flattest and most certain, the voice of something absolute, will say anything to you about how you look. Not in my presence or outside of it. Iris looked at him for a long moment. Okay, she said. Outside, the oaks moved in the dark. Biscuit's purring filled the kitchen with its small and serious sound. Matteo Corsetti, who owned freight companies and other things, and moved through the world like weather moves, sat at her kitchen table and drank his coffee and did not go anywhere. And Iris Dunn, who had spent 7 years perfecting the art of not being seen, sat across from the one person in the building who had always seen her and let herself be looked at. It turned out to be easier than she'd expected. That was the thing about the right kind of attention. When it finally arrived, it didn't feel like exposure at all. It felt in the way that things feel when they've been true for a long time, and you've simply stopped arguing with them, exactly like coming home.